So. Ja, entweder liegt es an der Mittagszeit oder das Interesse hält sich tatsächlich in Grenzen. Ich werde jetzt nach Englisch umschalten. This presentation has been announced as being in English language, so I'm now going to switch to English. I hope nobody has any problems understanding English. Yeah. Apparently it's lunchtime, or people are not very interested in that subject because the lecture hall is actually quite empty. Anyway. I'm Harald Welte. I'm going to talk about my efforts in enforcing the GNU General Public License in Germany. The subject is the GNU GPL is not public domain. A short overview about what this presentation will be about. Have some kind of introduction. I will make a short statement about what is actually copyrightable, some terminology issues. A little bit of an overview about free and open source software licenses. Not so much like you've never seen the GPL, what is it all about, but more for people who actually think they know the GPL, but maybe didn't get some certain parts. There's lots of misunderstanding going on. Even like people like the Red Hat CEO in public interviews makes statements which are actually really contradictory to what is actually stated in the GPL. So there's lots of confusion going on. I'm going to try to give some clarification on these issues. Then some discussion about what complete source code is, what derivative works are, what about so-called non-public modifications, and last but not least, the GPL violations I've been tracking down. An overview about the past GPL enforcement that has been going on, Linksys case, a typical enforcement timeline of the cases we've had so far, success we've had so far, and maybe some outlook on the future. So, first of all, very short slide about background of myself. I'm an independent free software developer. I'm basically earning my living off writing and supporting and administrating free software since 1997. And I'm mostly known for being one of the authors of the Linux kernel 2.4 and 2.6 packet filtering subsystem, firewall subsystem called NetFilter IP tables. I'm not a lawyer. I have no legal background whatsoever. So that's going to be a legal disclaimer on the next slide. Yeah, I'm speaking to you because, as I indicated a minute ago, I think there's way too much confusion about what the GPL really states and what it doesn't state and what exactly you are required when you redistribute. Yeah, and that's this, yeah, Matt Sulik, who actually stated that Red Hat puts so many millions of investments into the public domain, but the GPL is not public domain. Public domain is a very specific legal concept, and it's abandoning copyright, and the GPL is actually a copyright license, so it doesn't abandon copyright at all. Yeah, legal disclaimer. All information is provided on an as-is basis. You might know that term from somewhere. There's no warranty for correctness of legal information. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. And anything I'm stating about my experience in enforcing the license is based on my experience in the German jurisdiction. And as our international guests will most likely know, the German-French legal tradition has quite a different view on copyright. We actually call it author's right, not copyright, than the British-American system of copyright. So there's differences in the jurisdictions. Okay. So if we talk about the GNU GPL, we see it's a license. So a copyright license can only exist on something that is actually copyrightable. So we have to ask the question, what is a copyrightable work in the field of computer software? So in German we have that term called Schöpfungshöhe, which is like there's a certain amount of, I don't know the exact English term for it, but it's like if you just write down, you know, like some random words and or maybe a very primitive statement in a program or something like that, it's not automatically copyrightable. It has to have some, there's a certain hate of, it's not like a hate of invention as with patents, but there's a certain amount. So, for example, if you correct a spelling mistake in a program, then like somebody wrote that program, you downloaded it from somewhere, you corrected a spelling mistake, or maybe, you know, like you fixed a signedness bug or something like that, then your contribution to that project is not a copyrightable contribution to that project, because you merely fixed like a spelling mistake or something. That doesn't make you a copyright holder. So if you only if you basically you put a certain amount of work which requires a certain creativity or whatever into that particular software project, then you can claim to have part of the copyright of that program. So an indication for that, as according to the lawyers I've been talking to, is that as soon as the programmer has a choice to do something like either one way or the other, and not just a syntactical choice, but also a semantical choice, like, okay, I want to sort something, I want to go for this or that algorithm, then you make a choice, and then you can say, well, there is an indication that this is copyrightable work because there was actually, you know, some thought put into that. It's not something trivial. Okay, so the level for copyrightable works is relatively low, because, I mean, most of you in this audience will write code yourself, and if you ask that question, when do you have a choice in programming? I mean, you have so many choices with every single line you write. So apparently this level after which something is a copyrightable work is relatively low. Okay, let's go on. Terminology. There's a couple of terms. That's a question. Could please wait for a microphone. We are actually recording this, and if you don't speak into a microphone, no, just grab the microphone and hand it over to. Thanks. The microphone is not working. Could you try? Please. Could somebody switch on the microphone? Ask your question, I'll repeat it.
Yes. Okay, I read somewhere, there is the microphone, on the GNU side that the minimum amount of lines for something to be copyrightable is something around 15. So if it's less than 15 lines, it's probably not copyrightable.
Yeah, but I mean, you can write 15 lines without making any sense and without actually getting some work done, or you can write 15 lines of obfuscated, you know, like code that implements a whole program. So speaking in numbers of numbers of lines of code is always a bad kind of terminology, you see, because it depends on the way you use the particular program, like the coding style you use, all kinds of factors, what amount of lines you have. I mean, 15 lines might be, you know, like a rule of thumb, sort of, but well, you know, I can certainly find a number of lawyers who would argue, no, even in 3 lines or an average 4 lines, you can find copyrightable work. So I don't want to debate about that. This is not really the subject of this, but yeah, at some point, all I wanted to say is that there is a certain limit after which, or a certain level after which something is copyrightable. And if you are below that limit, whatever you did is not copyrightable, therefore you cannot put it onto a copyright license and so on. That's about the statement I wanted to make here. Okay? Yeah, so I certainly don't need to clarify those terms. I'm just going to skip these slides. I mean, shareware, freeware, public domain, you're certainly familiar with these terms from the good old DOS days. Basically, the only thing that is important is public domain, which is basically abandoning all copyrights. And this is only possible in the English-American law tradition of copyright. In Germany, you can never put something into public domain. It's impossible, because you're the author of it. It will become public domain, gemeinfreies Werk, the German word for it, after, like, you know, 70 years after you're dead. But you cannot make it public domain before that. You can say, well, okay, I agree, everybody can do whatever he wants to do, but you still hold copyright on it. So it's a little bit different. Freeware, shareware, cardware, beerware, all proprietary software with different kind of licenses. And of course, we have free software and open source. I'm not going to go into the details here either. I'm going to refer for the rest of this presentation to it as free and open source software, FOSS. because I don't want to make, I don't want to join sides, the open source movement or the free software movement. Now, a couple of words about the commonly found free and open source software licenses. So basically you had the original BSD license, which is not used for any project I know, at least for a number of years, which allows you redistribution and modification. It even allows you to, get some BSD license code, put it into a proprietary project, and all documentation and advertisement materials with that old license had to mention the copyright holder, which was impractical. And in 1992, if I'm not mistaken, the University of Berkeley revised the BSD license and published their code under this new license, which didn't have this advertisement clause. So you don't need to put all the copyright statements and stuff into the advertisement and documentation you ship with a product. Then, of course, you have the GNU General Public License, which allows you redistribution, including modified works, but it obliges the distributor to supply the source code, including all modifications. Usage rights are revoked if license conditions are not met. That's an important thing to note in the GPL. So the GPL basically, in 99.9% of the license text, it only targets distribution. You can use that software for whatever purpose. Actually, the GPL requires you to be able to use the software for any kind of purpose you want, non-discriminatory, for anybody, for any purpose. So it's always, it grants you all rights to use the software, and it regulates rights or associated with distribution of software. But there's 0.1% of the license which actually states that if you violate the license, then you are automatically revoked the right to use the software in the first place. So not only you are illegally distributing the software, but also you're illegally using it from that point on. That's a kind of a safeguard which is often found in any kind of software licenses. So people often point this out like, oh, well, the GPL is evil because it has this clause in it. But look at any proprietary or whatever kind of software license, this kind of statement you have very often. As soon as you violate copyright, you lose the right to use the particular software. And there's the LGPL, sometimes referred to as lesser general public license, or also as library general public license, which has a slight difference that it explicitly allows you to link that particular library against proprietary applications which would not be allowed with the GPL. It was written as a special case for libraries such as glibc, but of course you can use it for, for any kind of project. So this should be mostly known to all of you, so that's why I'm going through this very quickly. Now the important or interesting part starts. As I said, GPL regulates distribution, it doesn't regulate usage in general. It allows distribution of source code and modified source if 3 conditions are met. Distribution of the source code or modified source code if 2 conditions are met. For one, you have to mention that the code is subject to the GPL. So if you distribute that program to somebody else, you have to mention to him that this code is subject to the GNU GPL. I think that's only fair, because somehow if you get a piece of software from somebody, you need to be told what you're allowed to and what not. So it's only fair that he said, there's this software, it's subject to GPL, you're allowed to do this and that. And that's what the second issue is about. The copy of the license has to accompany the software itself. Oh, what's that? Oh, my power, battery power, sorry. You have to mention that it's subject to GPL, and you have to give a copy of the GPL license text. It doesn't have to be a physical copy. There's nowhere stated that you have to print it on paper. If you ship a software on a piece of storage medium, just put the license somewhere in there. That's it. If you want to distribute binaries, object code, or modified object code, you have 3 conditions. It's 3 conditions. First, you have to mention the license as before. You have to give a copy of the license text. The first 2 conditions are the same as for source code distribution. And the third condition is that you have to give the complete source code included with your binary copy, or alternatively, you give a written offer to your users that you will give him a copy of the source code. The written offer has to be valid for at least 3 years, and it has to be open to any third party. So if you distribute some object code and you choose you choose to include the source code with every copy of the binary. So like you have a CD-ROM and there's binaries and source code. Then you only need to give the source code to the recipients of your binaries. But if you do not put the source code on this storage medium, but you choose to go for GPL section 3b, it states that you have to make a written offer. So it has to be written down somewhere when you ship that product, or that doesn't have to be a product. It's not independent of any kind of commercial or non-commercial use. And the written offer has to be valid to any third party. So whoever sends you some mail and like, oh yes, I require the source code for this and that, you are obliged to ship him that source code. And you are allowed to charge him the cost that you have for physical reproduction and for shipping that copy, but no more than that. So you're not allowed to make any profit from copying and shipping the software. So from my point of view, 3A, which means including the source code with the product, the software, the object code, should be the more convenient solution. You're just done at that point. Okay. So the GPL has a definition of what complete source code is. I'm going to quote that. Complete source code means all the source code for all modules it contains. It is the software. Plus any associated interface definition files, plus the scripts used to control compilation and installation of the executable. So our interpretation of this, let's translate that into a typical C program, is, well, the source code, your C files, the make files, which are the scripts used to control compilation, those GPL violations we've been seeing is mostly embedded devices, so that's why I'm referring to firmware here. So let's assume one of these embedded devices that ships with the GPL subject firmware, or the firmware that includes GPL portions. Then our interpretation of the GNU GPL is that you have to provide the tools which actually generate these firmware binaries. Because if you go to the preface of the license, then you see actually why the license is like that, or what is the reason of the GPL. And the reason is to enable the user to modify the software and run modified versions of that software. And if you ship a product bundled out of GPL software and some kind of hardware, and you give the source code, but you don't give the tools for actually putting the compiled object code onto that device, the user has no way of running the modified binaries. Therefore, you basically you circumvent the whole purpose of the license. Of course, this is something I've noted that there's a question over there, but let me just continue with that slide at least. So you defeat the purpose of the license at that point. Of course, this is not clearly stated in the text of the GPL itself. But if you look like something like that works when it goes to court, then the court has to do an interpretation of the license. And if the preface actually states what the purpose of the license is, and you see that the action somebody did, although it isn't explicitly forbidden by the license, it sort of would circumvent or prevent the whole purpose of the license, then at least our position is that this would very likely hold in court. This hasn't been proven. But with all the GPL enforcement I've been doing over the last year, and it's now up to like 25 cases, we never had to argue about that point. After we contacted the companies, they were always willing to provide these tools to create those firmware binaries. Even if they didn't do initially, we had to ask them twice or thrice, but in the end we finally got it. So, another result of this position or of this interpretation of the license is that signing a binary and only accepting binaries that are signed by a particular key that is not known to the user is, from our understanding of the GNU General Public License, not possible. So if you ship a device and it has a bootloader that only accepts a kernel signed with a certain key, and you don't ship that key, or you don't give the user the ability to put a different key into the bootloader, then you're preventing the purpose of the license, which is to enable the user to run a modified version of the original program. Again, this has not been enforced so far because we didn't have nobody tried to do that in all the cases I've been trying, or we've been trying to put through. Another interesting or much debated question, of course, when it comes to the GPL is what is a derivative work? Well, if you try to look at this not from a technical point of view, but from a legal point of view, technicians might argue about, oh yes, this is, execing a different program, or this is executing a system call, this is dynamic linking, static linking, RPCs, whatever kind of stuff. But no judge will ever be interested in what kind of strange technical measure you do, They will look from a totally different point of view, and they are looking at it from a more abstract position. Like, is this piece of code useful without the other piece? Are they dependent? Is it possible to, that one piece of the code can be exchanged with another component and it still works? And you have to ask these kinds of questions in order to determine whether there is an indication of a derivative work. So there is no clear rule or no line of, don't cross that line, after that is a derivative work. It's always a vague, undefined question, and you have to ask yourself, is this whatever I've written, does it have a purpose on its own? Does it run on its own? Can it run on with a different library that implements the same functions than this GPL library? That kind of questions. Again, we don't have any precedent about that yet. But what my lawyers are telling me is that as soon as code is written for a specific non-standard API, such as, for example, in our case, the IP tables plugin API. You can write plugins for your packet filter in Linux. And this API, this was designed by us. No other operating system implements that API. There's no other software that has a similar or the same kind of API. So if somebody writes a plugin for that, then there is, it's not a clear case, but there is significant indication that this is a derivative work. So if you write against an API that is sort of standard and it's, it's implemented multiple times and in different operating systems or in whatever kind of different other components, then you can certainly claim, well, this is independent, this is not derived from each other, this works, you can run it on BSD, so why should it be derived from the Linux kernel, stuff like that. So this is the kind of questions or the kind of viewpoint you need to get onto the subject if you want to look at it from a legal and copyright point of view. This position, like IP tables, plugins, and those kind of things that are written against a specific non-standard API, has been enforced in those cases. I've been enforced. So there were a couple of vendors who actually wrote, connection tracking helpers for whatever kind of protocols, and they, in the process of enforcing the GPL, they actually released that code. And it was no debate at all. They just did it. We didn't have to explicitly ask them for it, but they did it. So I think there is a good position for having this kind of claim. Yeah, so in-kernel proprietary code are hard to claim GPL compliant. It's really depending on a case-by-case analysis. If you look at, for example, a network driver, and this network driver, just by changing a couple of wrapper function, you can run it in BSD or somewhere else, then you can certainly say, okay, this is not a derived work. But if you write something that is really tightly integrated with the operating system and which is not easily ported to another operating system, for example, again, talking about this Linux kernel case, then it will be hard for you to claim that, this is totally independent and it's useful, and you see, like, it runs on its own, it's not depending on the Linux kernel, it's not derived somehow from the way the Linux kernel works. But again, this is a case-by-case analysis, and you really need to look at the particular case when we're talking about this. But apparently this, for example, IBM did a legal analysis of that, and I've been told that they are trying to get any kind of proprietary drivers and stuff they have in the kernel out. So at the moment, in certain installations, they ship with proprietary code in the kernel, but they are working on re-implementing this stuff, and they want to get rid of it as soon as possible for the legal reasons. If you release the source code, if you make it GPL compatible, you're done. Nobody can ever claim that you did something wrong or that there are licensing issues, whatever. So they just want to get out of all this ambiguity and want to state clearly, we ship only GPL compliant, whatever kind of stuff, and nobody can. So yeah. Another issue is the issue of so-called collected works, which is even more vague and ambiguous than derivative works. Again, a quote from the license: "It is not the intent to claim rights or contest your rights to work written entirely by you. Rather, the intent is to exercise the right to control the distribution of derivative or collective works. Mere aggregation of another work with the program on a volume of a storage or distribution medium does not bring the other work under the scope of this license," which is very clear. Like the mere aggregation on storage medium is, like a Linux distribution, a general purpose Linux distribution, SUSE, Red Hat, Debian, whatever. Debian only ships sort of free things because of the Debian Free Software Guidelines, but if you look at SUSE, for example, they ship a proprietary Flash player and, whatever kind of GPL licensed operating system and libraries on one CD or DVD, and that's perfectly fine. GPL says this is mere aggregation storage medium, you're clear. However, there is this issue of collective works, and it apparently is a legal gray area, because the GPL claims that anything that is more than mere aggregation, and now we can start to think of, well, what is more than mere aggregation, is a collective work, and therefore you're not allowed to do that. Whether this is backed by copyright in the respective jurisdiction that you are in is a totally different question. So even when the GPL states that, doesn't mean that it actually is enforceable in that case. So there's no precedent at all. Even if you don't look at free software, where we only have a single court decision up to now, but if you look at general software copyright issues and legal cases, apparently there's very little precedent, because companies tend to make out-of-court agreements, which basically prevents any precedent from being set. So if you're a lawyer or any kind of a person who tries to research on that subject and look for precedent, you won't find that many, because before it comes to a judge court order, actually most of the times the companies have some kind of out-of-court agreement. So this is really open and undefined, unfortunately. Another issue which I understand as a common misconception is, at least here in Germany, it's a peculiar issue of the German copyright, that if you develop develop code within a corporation, let's say you download GPL licensed program foo from the internet, and you change and you modify it, you make a derivative work of it. If you only distribute that within that corporation, then you're on the clean side. That's not the case. German copyright and the term distribution in German copyright does not actually deal with juristical persons. It only deals with, physical persons. So whenever you distribute a copyrighted work, to more than, your close colleagues in the same department of you, like you send it to a different department of the company, and maybe in a different country, or, people whom you've never met, with whom you don't have any kind of relationship, then this, according to German right, that's what I've confirmed this several times with lawyers, and it is really the case. So this already is distribution according to German copyright. So if you're Siemens and you develop something in department A and you ship it to department B, even though it never leaves Siemens, it's already distribution according to copyright. So that's well, of course, who will know, if you just distribute it within the company? Who would be able to complain about your whatever kind of non-complying behavior? But I'm just raising this issue to make people aware of it. There might be an issue. Give it some thought when you want to get into that. Especially this becomes, of course, important and even more clear if you have a contractor, for example. Like you have a contractor and you give him some code or he gives you some code back, then this is certainly already distribution. And if in this kind of contractor and corporation kind of scenario, if you ever happen to ship some object code without the corresponding source code, you automatically go into section 3b, which states that you have to ship the source code to any third party, because you're in the written offer case then. So if you want to make it right, it's actually, you have to make sure that with every binary you ever ship to a contractor or a consultant, you always include the full source code, if it is GPL derivative work, of course. Because otherwise you run into that issue where you are obliged to ship that code to any third party, even not the contractor. So that's, you know, that's what legal departments are for. People should consult legal departments before they get involved with that. Not just, you know, release products and then, you know, like half a year later when people start complaining, think about whatever they did at that moment. Okay, so if you violate the license, what happens? Well, first of all, when do you violate the license? If one of the conditions are not fulfilled, then you're violating the license. So it's already enough to not, you know, even if you ship the source code but don't ship the GPL license text, it's already a violation. You lose the right to use that software, and so on and so on and so on. So as I said, use it right, and any of the copyright holders can, as I've demonstrated, obtain a preliminary injunction banning you from actually distributing that software. And all the you know, all the uncertainty I've heard from the free software community, I think it's actually, you know, people are buying into fear, uncertainty, and doubt that is spread by certain elements within the free software world and the software world in general. To all the lawyers I've been talking about, you know, if you read whatever kind of statements and written, you know, written court rulings and whatever I've read about this issue, nobody actually had a doubt that it wouldn't be enforceable, you know. And even if the GPL would not be enforceable, then you're still the copyright holder, and whoever uses it has no right to use the software at all. You know, at least in Germany or in the French tradition of copyright law, you don't have to claim copyright. You automatically have copyright. And if whatever kind of license you have with somebody turns out to be, you know, even theoretically turns out to be not enforceable or not legally possible in that kind of jurisdiction, then you're still the copyright holder and somebody uses your software. So if the GPL doesn't apply or doesn't work or, you know, whatever, then he has no right at all to use that kind of software, and you still can impose the licensing conditions, which are like, you know, if you do modifications, you have to redistribute, you know, your modifications in source code. Past GPL enforcement. The Free Software Foundation, as far as I know, only in the United States have done GPL enforcement for at least, you know, a decade or even two. I've had the opportunity to, at this same stage earlier this year at Wizards of Oz conference, I met Ivan Moglen. He's the chief legal counsel of the Free Software Foundation in the United States. And we've been talking for you know, a number of time, long time about all these GPL enforcement issues and so on. And according to him, they've been doing this for, you know, whatever kind of time, but they never made it public. So you know, whoever did violations of the GPL of software that the Free Software Foundation is the copyright holder on, they just said, well, you know, we don't want to have this public and we don't want to have any press about that. And then the Free Software Foundation sort of said, well, okay, we agree to that, and maybe some donation was made or whatever kind of stuff, but it was never... initially, Ivan Moglen was not allowed to take any donations. It's a very recent development that Richard Stallman actually allowed Ivan Moglen to take any kind of donations in these kind of enforcement cases. That's what I've been told. So they did it silently without any public notice, and apparently in very lengthy negotiations. And well, it's good that they are doing it, and they can do with their copyright whatever they want, but I had some issues with this kind of approach. And those issues became apparent last year in 2003 during the infamous Linksys case. I'm talking about the Linksys WRT45G access point and router and yeah, point with I, not pont. And they had lots of, and still have, lots of GPL licensed software embedded in that device, including Linux kernel, UClibc, BusyBox, and IP tables. So as one of the copyright holders of IP tables, I was part of the Free Software Foundation's copyright holder alliance that negotiated with Cisco legal directors, and because Linksys was acquired by Cisco and so on. So the FSF did the usual quiet approach. And in the end, Linksys bought itself, I think, about 4 or 5 months in time. You know, like they were shipping a product. Then some user had to detect that there was GPL software in there that they violated the license. Then they communicated to the FSF. FSF contacted other copyright holders. Then the FSF sent a letter to a Cisco legal department. And then, you know, a couple of weeks passing, month passing, then there was some response, and it got back and forth and back and forth. There was some source code released back and forth, some more source code released back and forth, and so on. Meanwhile, they were still selling the devices and selling them every single device with copies of GPL licensed programs and were infringing. So as I said, 4 or 5 months, and I found that totally unacceptable. So the NetFilter IP tables project, we decided that we want to do this. I mean, it was apparent that more and more of these devices are coming up on the market, and we wanted to have this very clearly stated that, I mean, we are licensing under the GPL for a purpose and not, I mean, we could license our code under VSD license if we didn't want to have that particular feature, the copyleft feature of the GPL, you know. If we didn't want to have that feature, we would have put our code under VSD license. But we want to have that feature, so we also want to see it enforced and adhere vendors and whatever kind of organizations to that kind of licensing decision that we made. So yeah, some developers disagreed, not enough publicity, and my basic point was that whoever violates the license doesn't lose anything. You see, like, it doesn't cost anything. There is no, you know, they don't experience any kind of, you know, pain or whatever kind of thing. You know, it's like, with the next product, they just do it again. Why shouldn't they? You know, like, there was no bad press about them. They didn't have to pay anything. They didn't have any kind of expenses within the corporation to change anything. There was nothing, you see. Like, and with the next product, I could just do it again and do it again and again, and there's no way to change or stop that. So, as I said, we started to get our own kind of enforcement running. So what happens in our cases is that you know, usually some user sends me an email like, oh, you know, I've found that this kind of piece of software device that, you know, includes IP tables, whatever. Then I start to reverse engineer those firmware images, and when I'm convinced that my code is actually in there, I'm asking a lawyer to send a warning notice. So whatever organization, company did that infringement receives a warning notice which states, well, you know, we found that there's some licensing issues with this kind of product. Please sign this statement to cease and desist, which basically states, well, you know, we will cease to distribute the product without complying with those 3 conditions that the GPL says, and then those 3 conditions are copied from the GPL license text, and that's about it. That's what we ask them to sign. If they decide, oh yes, or we did something wrong, was an accident, whatever kind of thing, yes, of course, from now on we try to comply with the license. We sign that statement to cease and desist. Yeah, usually the vendors want to have some grace period, so, you know, because they have already like 20,000 of these devices boxed and packaged and sitting somewhere in stock. And if they sign the statement to cease and desist, it would become, you know, valid at the moment they sign it. And therefore, they would have to change all the boxes sitting in stock, you know, opening the packages, putting GPL or source code, CD-ROM, whatever kind of thing into those boxes, which is expensive to do. So they try to find some agreement, and then we usually say, well, okay, if you want to do that, we can give you some kind of grace period, but then, you know, might be a good idea to show your support to the free software community in some other way, which usually results in some kind of donation. I mean, and I think that's fair because, you know, even despite we know they are distributing not complying to the GPL, we allow them like for 4 weeks or something like that. We give them a sort of grace period to get their stuff organized, and in turn they sort of, you know, oh, we did something wrong. Please show our, you know, we're sorry. So if they don't sign that kind of statement, it gets more interesting, which means that first of all, I contract a recognized technical expert, recognized as to the courts, to do actually an analysis, a study of that particular GPL violation. And this kind of technical expert report goes into an application for preliminary injunction, and in the end we apply for a preliminary injunction. We had to apply, I think, 2 times. Only one of them actually, one of them we had to cancel because then was just some shift, and finally they signed the declaration to cease and desist, and we decided not to apply for the preliminary injunction. But in one case we actually had to do that. So what happens then? What kind of success do we have? Well, we have amicable agreements, which is like out-of-court settlements with a number of companies. The number will be on one of the next slides. So some of them actually made quite significant donations to charitable organizations in the free and open source community. We have the preliminary injunction against Sitecom. Sitecom then decided to appeal against that injunction, and they also lost the appeal. And we have a number of more settled cases then on the next slide, which are not public yet because there's still some negotiations and whatever kind of stuff going on. And we have got lots of public awareness. Interestingly, we got more public awareness from legal people than from software people. So I got numerous interview requests and emails and stuff from people, from editors of you know, legal journals all over the world, but from the software world it was quite limited. But I mean, it also, a couple of weeks ago I sent an email to a Taiwanese embedded company. I didn't had anything to do with them. I didn't do any GPL enforcement with them whatsoever. And I sent them an email like, oh yes, Mr. Welty, and we know from your efforts for free software, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, so some people got the message. Okay, I've also heard that, you know, there was a presentation in, I think it was Brussels, at some conference, and I've seen the slides, and when the slides is like, what corporations need to know. Like corporations who get involved into doing business with GPL subject software, and there was, you know, like 2 or 3 issues, and the 3rd or 4th one was Harald Welte. It's like, I don't want to do that. I'm a coder, you know. I want to write code. I'm not a lawyer, and I really, I'm going to talk about this in the future slide, but let's first have a look at the list we have here. Oh, it's cut on the bottom. So we have AllNet, Siemens, Fujitsu Siemens, Axis, Secure Point, US Robotics. Undisclosed is Netgear. It's actually disclosed now. Belkin, Asus, Gate Protect, Sitecom, TomTom, Gigabyte Technology, D-Link, Sun, OpenE. We also have, what do we have right now? Let me think. There's a couple of more. It's only minor, small companies, which you don't. Nobody actually knows. But well, we have a couple of major companies from the networking, embedded networking kind of market. You know, like Netgear, US Robotics, these kinds of companies. And yeah, I think that's quite a good result for like 12 months now. Thank you. Thank you. Just a side note on that, because I only hold copyright, well, no, I'm only one of the authors of the packet filtering subsystem. So when somebody builds a device that doesn't do packet filtering, I'm not one of the authors, so I cannot do something. I try to motivate more developers into getting this kind of business, but obviously it's not everybody's, well, you know, favorite spare time kind of thing to do. So what actually happened is that a number of people actually signed over copyright on certain parts of the Linux kernel to me. So I know, even though I'm not the author, I hold the copyright of the init.rd code and the FAT file system implementation, for example. Even though these authors don't actually want to get involved into enforcing the license, I have the means of enforcing any kind of infringements that are related to that parts of the code. Of course, as a goal for next year, probably, we are actually planning to establish some kind of non-for-profit organization, like a legal support organization for free software developers, where you can actually sign a fiduciary license agreement with this kind of organization, and then they would take care of enforcing any kind of infringements that would be there. And it's, of course, as I said, a charitable entity, and make sure that nobody will make any kind of profit of that. The Free Software Foundation, they are not interested in, well, you see, Richard Stallman stated in an interview, like, I'm doing this very aggressive, and you see, like, they are doing it their quiet way, and they think this is the way they want to do it. And, well, everybody has the choice to have an opinion on that subject, and everybody can do whatever he wants with the kind of copyright he has. And I think we now need to make, or as we have made, a number of cases public. And my big hope is that, after some time, there will be a learning effect. So certainly those companies who have now signed a declaration to cease and desist, they haven't signed that for a particular product. They've signed it for, MS-DOS file system, or the Linux NetFilter IP tables implementation. So whenever they release a new device or a new product that includes that source code, they immediately not only violate the copyright license, but are also in breach of that contract and so on. So it gets more problematic. So you can be quite sure that they are not going to do it again. And by making this public in a way, I think, and as I've said, in this case of the Taiwanese company, it already worked. In some other cases, I've also been referred to that people became aware of that. You have to get it into the news somehow. You have to make it public in order to prevent them from doing it again. You see, I think so far I have a database set up for all these kinds of violations, and at the moment I have something like 120 violations in that database. I've only enforced, like with 25 companies, maybe resulting in like 30, 35 products subject. So I have this extremely big pile, and every week I get new email about, there's this violation going on. I cannot do it. I don't have the time. I'm already spending like 1/3 of my time with this kind of crap, and I don't want to do that. So my hope is that, you make it public, and you make those corporations and individuals understand that the GPL is, not some whatever kind of statement, but it's a license, and that it can actually be enforced. So let me get through those remaining 2 slides before we can take questions. Future GPL enforcement. Yeah, as I said, I think it's going to be an important issue for free software, especially with all the embedded Linux-based devices we've seen. The wireless access points was only the first group of devices. We've seen Linux in, GPS navigation systems. We've seen Linux in network-attached storage kind of devices, in all kinds of different embedded devices. And I think the home multimedia center kind of things, like DVD player with integrated DVB receiver and some Ethernet port and streaming and whatever kind. There's lots of devices running Linux, which is a good thing. We want to encourage people using the Linux operating system on their devices, but they have to play by the rules, and the rules are very simple. The rules are, if you comply with the license from the beginning, it's very cheap, because all of these devices ship with a CD-ROM, and I've never seen a CD-ROM that was full. There was always at least 200 megabytes of free space on that CD-ROM. So if from the beginning they had thought about the issue and put the source code on that CD-ROM, they would have it totally for free. No extra page to print, no extra CD to press, no nothing. It would be really for free to them to comply with the license. And I think it's not too much to ask for this little bit amount of effort in return from them. Okay, so what kind of problems do we have? One of the big problems is that only the copyright, it's a legal consequence. Only the copyright holder, which is in most cases the author, can do any kind of enforcement. So if you go to MediaMarkt or whatever, Saturn or whatever kind of Fry's, I don't know, any kind of a store, and you buy something, and then it turns out it runs GPL software, and you want to have the source code, then it is, very hard to impossible for you to get that source code. you need to have the original author or the copyright holder to put some kind of legal pressure on whoever sold or built that kind of device or that kind of product you have obtained. So it's work that can only be done by the authors and copyright holders. The users have to contact the copyright holders and they can do something about it. Otherwise, there is some, maybe I'm going to try that next year at some point, like some device where I don't hold copyright, I'm just as a user. Because at least in German law, I've been told there is like, you know, Vertrag zu Rechten Dritter or something like that, where I can actually claim that, you know, the GPL is a contract between the copyright holder and the creator or the vendor of that device, and I am entitled to something by this contract. Therefore, I am, you know, a beneficiary of that contract, and I can force them to give me the benefits of that. But anyway, that still has to be proven whether it's possible or not. I've also started this GPLviolations.org project, which unfortunately I didn't have that much time. It's just a couple of web pages, 2 mailing lists, and a couple of email addresses at the moment. But I think it's going to grow. Especially, I want to have some interface to my database so people can actually see, you know, what kind of cases have been there, what kind of devices, what was it all about, this kind of stuff. But at the moment, I just didn't have the time to get this running. But let's see what next year will show us. Hey, it's still 8 minutes to go. Why is everybody leaving? It's so boring. There's a number of issues which make later enforcement easy. If you're a software author and you ever, well, you fear you're ever going to have to enforce your copyright, then there's a number of things which you can do from the beginning and to make later enforcement easy. One funny thing, which is, it's honest, it's not a joke, is don't fix typos in error messages and symbol names. Because how do you prove that this is derivative work or your code is actually in that object code? The most easy or the most, the way you or the technical expert would actually do that is like, you know, look for symbol tables, look for error messages, those kinds of things. If the strings are the same, you know, symbol tables have the same symbol names and so on. It's, you know, and then he can say, well, this is not proof that the code is actually in there, but it's like, what would be the English translation of that? Like, it's the probability, it's with almost unlimited probability, you know, like something like that. He can make a statement of that, and that usually is enough to convince a court to believe you. So we have obscure error messages like Rusty needs more caffeine. So if somebody ever re-implements a firewall, it's very likely that we will have a function called IP_filter or something like that. It's very likely that somebody who writes independent some code will end up with the same name. But it's very unlikely that somebody will put an error message like that into a, you know, a firewall, or a number of them, even with typos, stuff like that. Also, it's a good idea to have the copyright message show up in the object code somehow. So you just define a constant string or whatever containing the copyright message, which actually ends up in the object file, even though if you never show it or you never print it. Of course, you can say, well, you know, what is this? You know, everybody who wants to, you know, everybody can just randomly change the string names, the error messages, the symbol names. He can just mangle them. But that's not the point. If somebody does that, he's doing it by intention, and it's legally a totally different issue. You know, then if he ever gets caught, then he's doing this by intention. That's a totally different kind of thing. Okay, if you ever want to claim damages, which is something I never did, we always only enforce this this kind of right to cease and desist. We never enforce damages as such. With damages, you have to be able to state, you know, which particular author has written which particular amount of code in that project. If you cannot state that, the court is not able to distribute the damages among all the authors, and it's very hard for you to claim that. So if you want to do that, you certainly need very good documentation. And if you find out about a violation, it's probably a good idea to not make it public initially. Inform the copyright holders, but don't make it public initially. The problem is, if I want to obtain a preliminary injunction, I have to argue that it is an urgent issue. If this has been on Slashdot half a year ago, no judge is going to believe me, this is an urgent issue. You know, like, you've waited for half a year, this is not urgent. And then you have to go into a normal copyright trial kind of thing, where your first first appointment with the court will be scheduled next year or something. And it's like, yeah, and then the product is end of life already up to that point. So it's basically pointless. Okay, that's really it, is it? Yes. My usual thanks slide. I'm not going to read that. Thank you for your attention. We have 5 minutes for questions, and if you have any questions exceeding that time, you can contact me. I'm going to be around, but I'm quite busy as I'm doing the video recordings and stuff. But yeah, questions.
One more thing. Did you ever think about LGPL enforcement? Because little known fact about LGPL is that you actually have to ship the object files to allow relinking with newer versions of the LGPL library. And since all the libcs on Linux that are used by things like Acrobat Reader, they actually would have to ship the object files of their things. And the license actually says that you have to be allowed to do reverse engineering. So it's really quite stronger than most people think.
Yes, the LGPL is from a later date. The LGPL is more recent, version 2.1 than the old GPL. And it's very explicit about lots of things. If you read the LGPL, it makes even statements about what kind of inline functions you're allowed to use from header files. Like inline functions with more than a certain number of lines you're not allowed to use from your non-GPL application, stuff like that. So it's very more precise. I have not thought, to reply to Fif's question, I have not thought or done any LGPL enforcement because I've never been an author of any LGPL component. So even the libraries we have within the NetFilter project are all GPL only, not LGPL licensed. So I personally have not thought about that because of this issue.
Is this on? Yeah. One issue we're seeing with, we're doing a project that's GPL with lots of crypto code, and there are lots of accelerator hardware vendors out there, and they're all starting to write a middle layer into it so that it's an API towards the Linux kernel, and then there's an API to their hardware. And then they release that in a proprietary form. And then you're still stuck with nothing. And do you have any advice on how to prevent or how to pursue these people?
It's not easy. It's not a clear case again. I mean, I think from my feeling, it might be worth at some point to take any of these because as I said, the GPL is a copyright license. It's based on copyright, and if somebody does something clearly only to avoid something in your license, but that's all interpretation. So whatever kind of decision you would ever obtain is all based on interpretation of the court, which is not very well reliable for me as a programmer who is who's used to deterministic machines behaving in a certain way. Court decisions and interpretations of contracts, from me, if you look at cases, they can be totally random, and it's hard. It's hard. I don't have any particular advice, but if somebody drives this to the edge, it might be worth of trying to see whether there can be done something about that, but it's hard. Yes, question back there.
I have a question concerning who can enforce GPL. If there are several authors of a piece of software, so each one of them, or only all of them collectively?
That depends on the way how the piece of software was developed, at least in Germany. There is something called Miturheberschaft and something called Bearbeiterurheberrecht. So if you, 4 people meet in a room, they decide, oh yes, we want to develop this piece of software. You write this part of functions. You write this part of the functions. You have this kind of, then they all worked at the same time, and then the resulting work gets combined, then only all of them together can actually enforce it, because then it's the Miturheber case. However, free software is usually developed in a different way. So somebody posts some code, somebody edits it, submits a patch. This is not Miturheber, but it's Bearbeiterurheber, which is which is more an iterative process over some time. And then it's sufficient if one of them actually tries to enforce it, because everyone has the Bearbeiterurheberrecht.
And I have a second question. From environmental law, we know something that's called Verbandsklagerecht, where associations can enforce law, not only the people who live beside a factory, but maybe the Friends of the Earth or something. And since we now have a reform of copyright law in Germany, is it something you think would be sensible to have some kind of enforcement for associations dealing with co-free software?
I'm not sure whether this would actually work in any kind of legal way. I'm going to talk with my legal experts and bring up the issue whether it would make sense. I have to get off the stage now. Next presentation is coming up. Yeah, so if you have some questions, try to get a hold of me, but I tend to be quite busy because of video recording. So yeah, try your luck. And thanks for your attention. Thank you.